Mark, I appreciate you for joining, man. I came across an article where a professor was talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it caught my eye because that's something I'm real passionate about talking about. And
Yeah.
I was curious, man, how the heck are you still teaching saying that? I agree with what you were saying, by the way, but it just
Mm.
seems like that's not, you don't hear a whole lot of professors with your same, saying the same thing.
Yes, I don't know. I don't know what the explanation is. I do think it dangerous to criticize equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives, ideology, and practice. Maybe I'm not doing it personally, right? I'm not attacking any particular people. I'm focused on the ideas and the arguments and the practice. Perhaps that prevents people from getting their backs up, but there are some people who aren't happy about it, and perhaps my university isn't keen on my public arguments against EDI.
Are they, um, well, let's first introduce yourself, Mark. Where do you teach at and who are you?
Oh, I teach at a university called St. Mary's University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I've been here 22 years now. I have a doctorate in philosophy from the University of Toronto, and I love teaching philosophy. I love reading philosophy and writing philosophy and talking philosophy with people. I became concerned about the condition of the university probably in the 1990s, but not actively until the early 2000s. And I found out about a group called the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship. And I joined them in, I think, 2006, maybe 2005, but 2006 or around there. I became a member of the board of directors of SAFS, so Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship, in, I think it was 2010. I became president in 2015. I'm in my eighth year as the president. Yeah, I'm in my eighth year as president of SAFS, and I'm going to step down in May for the new president. So that's who I am and what I've been doing. And
Awesome.
SAFS is an organization that's devoted to academic freedom and freedom of expression on campus, the merit principle in academic decisions, trying to hold universities to high academic standards. Terrific little organization, and I'm happy to be part of it. Yeah, so that's where I am.
No, I appreciate that, Mark. So what's been the college's feel about, I mean, have they called you into the office to talk to you about like things that you're talking about? Have they tried to persuade you to think differently and say other things?
No, and there's something sad about that. I let the officials, the administrators at my university, know what I'm thinking and know what I'm saying. I present criticisms of EDI generally and criticisms of EDI initiatives at my university, and the response is silence.
Hmm.
I haven't heard anything from either the university and its administrators or our faculty union. They don't seem to want to discuss EDI. And I think that's part, well, there are two sources of that. One, if you're an administrator, you have to be careful because you want to stay with the university line. University administrators, like the vice presidents and the deans, they serve at the pleasure of the president. If they can be, if they're professors and they have tenure, so they can't be fired as professors, but they can be removed from their positions the moment they do anything that upsets the president or the academic vice president. So they have to be careful. There's that. There's also that if you're in a position of power, then the last thing you want is to expose yourself to any attacks or show any weakness. So I think, unfortunately, at a university where people are supposed to be disputatious, engaged in argument and criticism, the professors, even though they are professors, if they're academic administrators, they don't want to get involved in discussion. And so I think that's really, really unfortunate. On the other side, they are initiating various equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives and engaging in practices of EDI. And they don't justify it. They don't explain, except in the most vague and broad terms. So if there's a discussion to be had about EDI, it's not with the university administrators, and it's not really much with the union executives either. I think the discussion has to be with other people who care about the university, the alumni, the other professors, the students, people outside the university who care about universities, because that's where change is going to come from. It's not going to come from the administrators engaging in critical argument about their practices.
That's interesting. You said that this EDI discussion has been taking place since the early 1990s. I've been in corporate America since about 2008, and I didn't hear of any kind of EDI goals or initiatives or anything like that until maybe 8 to 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So that leads me to believe that most of the EDI and diversity and inclusion stuff that we're seeing today in corporate America started from colleges. Is that fair to say?
That's probably true. I couldn't give you a definite opinion on it. I'm not a historian. I haven't actually looked at it, but that corresponds well with my experience, with what I see has been happening. In the 1980s in the universities, there was a lot of discussion among students and young faculty about quotas to bring more women into positions of power, for instance. I know the student union at the time at the University of Toronto, where I was, came up with a policy that said that the two representatives would have to be, one of them at least would have to be female. So we could have two females or one male and one female. But not two men, two women, a man and a woman, but not two men. And so that was a policy back in, I don't know, 86 or 87.
Hmm.
And then you start seeing things like that in the wider world, maybe 20 years later. But I don't want to reason because it happened before, therefore it's the cause. But it invites study. I'd like to know what the historians think about the origin of EDI in the corporate world. Where did it come from?
Do you think diversity and inclusion is a larger topic in Canada than in the U.S.? It's more pervasive and in your face in Canada because I've seen story after story. Even Justin Trudeau was just in Mexico this past
Yeah.
week, and he was talking to Mexicans about diversity and inclusion, which is funny because I'm obviously Mexican, and I have friends that travel to Mexico. Very often they still have family that live there, and diversity and inclusion is not a topic that comes up amongst that
Mm,
amongst Hispanics or Latinos. So, yeah,
yeah.
what's your thoughts on that?
Well, in Canada, you may know we have a more paternalistic government, more communitarian government. Our human rights commissions, each province has a human rights commission, and then there's the Canadian Human Rights Commission. Each province has a human rights tribunal as well as the commission. And these bodies are set to look at the demographics of race, sex, sexual orientation, ability status, and the rest. And they're empowered to allow businesses, universities, and the rest to hire on discriminatory bases. And I know, I suspect that in the States it's harder to do that. It's harder to find legal ways to do that. Often affirmative action programs, as they used to be called, were taken to court and halted by because they contravened one or another statute. But here in Canada, the human rights commissions are encouraging companies and the universities to look at the demographics of their institution, compare the demographics to those outside the institution, and then try to make the institution reflect those demographics. And of course, the demographics have to do with so-called protected groups or historically marginalized groups, groups that I think the term now is equity deserving groups. Used to be equity seeking groups, but now equity deserving groups. So the demographics are based on these categories that people, especially in human rights commissions, have come up with. And then they say the university might want to hire more people of a particular race or sex or ability status or whatever. They can go to the Human Rights Commission and get an exemption from the equality legislation. And target the jobs. So, for instance, there are jobs directed at members of specific racial or ethnic groups.
Mm.
And I don't know that that's well, maybe it's possible in the States, but I suspect it's an awful lot harder.
You know, I know from firsthand experiences and from my friends that sit on interview teams for very large companies, they're persuaded very heavily to hire someone in a minority demographic versus someone that's white.
Yeah.
And as a Hispanic, I feel very weird doing that. You know, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't feel natural to me. And I know people get uncomfortable when you say reverse racism, but to me that's what it feels like. If you're hiring someone on the merit of just because their race and not at the merit of what they bring to the table or their credentials, their
Mm-hmm.
resume and what they can accomplish for the team, then I feel like if you hire a person that's, you know, just because of someone who is Asian or someone who's African American, then that person is always going to be known as like, it's like hiring somebody because their uncle is like the president of the company and, you know, the nephew got hired on. Like
Yeah.
everyone in the group knows, all right, you're here because your uncle is the president. It's kind of the same.
Right.
It's kind of the same thing. There's almost like a lack of respect for that person, and I think that
Yeah.
person is kind of like maybe like held in to a
Mm-hmm.
certain position or a job, and they won't be able to advance because they were hired for this particular role for this particular instance. I don't know if you feel
Yeah.
the same way.
Well, I think that's a very important observation. I first of all, just as a person speaking as myself, not as president of a society that's concerned with universities. I think that it's frightening to me that people have lost the sense of how repellent it is to judge people by the color of their skin, their sexual orientation, whatever. I would hope that people just thought
Yeah,
that was just ugly. Um, but that isn't as president of the staff. That's not my main concern. We're a group that has to do with universities, and so our ideas, our discussion, our criticisms have to be focused on education, have to be focused on the values of a university. And I think this is where the points you were making came in. It used to be the case, it still is the case for many academics that they want, to the extent that people are judging them as people, they want to be judged for the quality of their work. They want to be judged for the quality of their teaching, the quality of their mentorship, the quality of their discussion, the quality of the research they do. This is what matters to them. And many are appalled when they discover that they're being held in esteem because of some non-academic quality, because of something that's irrelevant to the quality of their work, their teaching, their research, and the like. We had an article in our SAFS newsletter once about a man, a gay man, who was told once by one of his colleagues a few years after he was hired, we hired you because you're gay. And he said it felt like a slap in the face. He said,
yeah,
I thought I was hired because I was not only a competent sociologist, but an exciting sociologist, that I was doing exciting work, that I was helping my students. I thought you hired me because you could see that. No, we hired you because of a personal characteristic. We wanted our department to have a gay man in it. So he was shocked and appalled by this. Why? Because he wanted to be understood as an academic. Now, even if your academic work is in some area that matters to you, Hispanic studies or queer studies or whatever, it's the quality of the work that matters to the academic. So one thing I fear is that some academics are losing that. That they want to be seen not only as an academic who is Black, but as a Black academic. And that somehow that is part of what they have to offer, right? They have their race to offer as well as the quality of their work. I think that's really unfortunate. It prevents us from talking to each other, from understanding each other. It can prevent us from working together. So I'm sad if there are some academics who are not merely saying, well, it's to my advantage to reveal my race because it'll make me higher and I want to get a job, but ones who say, well, this is perfectly all right. I want to be understood as a member of some group, of some category. But the other point you made, too, I think is right, that hiring on the basis of non-academic criteria, hiring on the basis of skin color, sexual preference, or whatever, rather than the quality of teaching or the quality of research, can slot people into categories and into groups, and then they have to fight to get out of them. It can also make other people want to judge their work on different and usually lower criteria, lower standards. And this is harmful for the university as a whole, I think.
It's a tough discussion, Mark, because listening to you talk, I agree with everything you're saying, but then there's this other birdie in my ear saying, well, what about the underrepresented people? There is a little bit of merit to that discussion, right? Like having, a professor who is teaching Spanish. It'd be a little weird, not weird, and I'm sure it's normal, but for a white person to teach, the advanced class in Spanish. I'm sure it happens all the time over, a Hispanic person who's grown up in the Mexican culture their entire lives. There is a little bit of underrepresentation, and I don't know how to address that, and I don't know what's right and wrong.
Well, if first of all, just want to talk about the academic promise, the academic accomplishment of the particular people. Now, it may well be that being an insider in some groups, say being Hispanic and teaching Hispanic literatures and language, you've been engaged in this study a lot longer maybe than some other people have. And so that gives you an advantage, but it's not an unfair advantage. You happen to be interested as an academic in Spanish literature, in the Spanish languages, and fine, you apply for a job and you are hired on the basis of your merit. And it just happens that it correlates with your ethnicity or your heritage. That's fine. But if you have a job search, and there are 4 leading candidates, whatever, and you would want, as members of hiring committee, to choose the person that you think will combine to the highest level teaching, mentoring, service, and research abilities. And it wouldn't matter what the skin color of the person is. It might turn out that overall Hispanics are hired for those jobs, but that's simply because these people happen to be the most meritorious candidates in that job pool. So if it turns out that professorships in Hispanic culture, Hispanic language, Hispanic literature are held by Hispanics. Well, that might be entirely innocent. That might just be that we found the people who are best at this, and they happen to be those who have roots in that culture.
Yeah. What's the support or the perception been like from students that you interact with? Do a lot of them agree with some of the statements that you've said before?
Yes, there are quite a few students who are looking for the two things. There are some students who think that controls on what can be said, what can be discussed. Well, what can be discussed first of all, and then what can be said during these discussions, even if it's just a chase out an idea, not to necessarily support it, but look at it. There are many students who've talked to me and said, they feel that at least in some classes there are positions that may not be described that one may not even appear to take, that this can set the professor wrong. And I think that is terribly unfortunate. At a university, when we're investigating things, I think that the thing to do is take those things that matter to you, your ideas, your emotions, whatever, and hold them at arm's length, and put them out so that they can be discussed and discussed critically. And it's a difficult thing to do because we're talking about elements of people's identity, things that really matter to them. But yet that's the academic engagement. The academic engagement is to look at these things that are very important to people and to look at them critically and to talk about them generally. At the end of the discussion, we don't, think of the person as in a bad light because of the ideas that the person may have described. The university can be fair and just and treat people as individuals and treat people well, and at the same time allow people to present, say, racist or sexist ideas and theories for the sake of discussion, and even racist and sexist theories in their own voice without facing repercussions. That would be to grapple intellectually with whatever the thesis or theory is.
Hmm. What about people from the minority communities? Have they come out in
Mm-hmm.
support and things you say, or they disagree?
Well, many one way, many the other.
Uh,
And I don't know what the percentages are. I don't know what the average are. The average is. But if you have a commitment to the academic mission, to the academic endeavor, to trying to understand things as they are, and trying to uncover evidence in all directions and evaluate all that evidence, then you're not going to want there to be restrictions on what people can say or what people can investigate based on hurt feelings or whatever. Even if your own feelings get hurt, because you're going to say, well, yes, my feelings are hurt because people were saying things that I thought not only false but pernicious, that could lead to evil. But we were discussing these things, and that's what I want to do. I want to discuss things as an academic. So there are students like that, but then there are other students. Universities aren't. They don't have one purpose or one function. They do a lot of things, and one of the things they do is they create competent young people to take their positions in the managerial and professional elite. And there are many students who are in school, in university, because they want to become part of the managerial professional elite, and that's what matters to them. And so they want to get through the university, and the university experience as the experience of the academic mission isn't all that central to them. And for them, it would matter whether they're comfortable or not in some classroom, because they want to move on. So I think there's a responsibility of the university, a duty of the university to try to, what's the term, socialize new students into the habits and the ways of a university.
Mm.
You're only there for a few years. If you don't like it, get your degree and you don't have to go anymore. But would give students an opportunity to see what it's like to try to live as an intellectual, to try to live as someone who's thinking about things, even things that are difficult, and thinking even thoughts that are difficult to think. But I think the universities have failed to explain, show, model to new students just what the university endeavor is about.
Mm.
And if they were to do that better, then people might say, well, yes, this is upsetting. But on the other hand, it's part of the discussion. And that's what matters to me, at least at this stage in my life.
Do you mean like the universities have failed because now if students or young people that enter the workforce from universities, if they don't like something, then it becomes canceled? Is that what you mean? Instead of like genuinely talking about it, having an open dialogue and seeing the differences from the other side, it's just easier to say, well, that hurt my feelings and you need to go away.
Well, I think people coming out of universities are becoming more like that, unfortunately. But I'm concerned about them during university and being encouraged to launch complaints about what someone said or about the atmosphere or the like. Being encouraged by offices at the university by university administrators. The the university administrators are you heard the term leaky pipeline.
It sounds familiar, but
Yeah,
I can't
well,
think of.
the idea is this: say you begin with 100 students, and let's say 30 of them. You mentioned Hispanics. Let's say 30 of them are Hispanic. And of course, people are going to drop out along the way before they get their degree. But if you start with, say, 30% who are Hispanic, and then the graduating class is, say, 10% Hispanic, then the thought is, well, the pipeline is leaky. The pipeline from first year to graduation has been leaking people of a particular demographic, Hispanics, women, whatever the group is. And then the thought is, well, we have to make it better, a better experience for them. And then that might lead to coddling students of particular types, holding them to lower standards than students of another type, listening to or taking seriously complaints about what their fellow students and what professors have said than other people. And I think that just makes what might be a bad situation makes it even worse, right? It removes the academic element from the university. If we're to deal with, if there is a problem about leakage, then we'll want to treat it with through the application of academic values and through fairness towards individuals. That's the way to deal with those sorts of problems, rather than creating a special caste that is exempt in some way from the rigors that a university usually holds students to.
What you were just saying there too also leads to just a softer society overall.
Well, yes, it can. A softer society, and also I think deformed interpersonal relationships, right? We want to be able to interact with each other as individuals, but as soon as you bring in an overseer, a mediator, someone who can pronounce on the quality of the relation between the two of you, well, you've made the relation between the two people artificial. Right. So if students are thinking, well, I can launch a complaint with the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity, then you've got this third agent who's above the two. Now, of course, you need that third agent, the police, when things get seriously out of control. But the sorts of bumps and bruises and scrapes that people are apt to inflict on each other just in day-to-day life, no, that ruins the ability of people to understand each other, to come together, to try to work together. If there's the opportunity to bring in an overseer, it's like calling the playground teacher
Hmm.
over. Yeah, you need to do it if fists are up. But other than that, let the kids work it out themselves.
Yeah. No, agreed. I kind of have this thought that the more we focus on race, the longer these discussions are going to go on. And even if there's not a problem will be created because we keep talking about it. And I know there's people that are going to say, well, then you're saying racism doesn't exist. And I'm not saying that whatsoever. There are most certainly racist people.
Hmm.
But what I am saying is, it's like if you're in a relationship and you do something bad, if you and the other person keeps bringing it up, you're never going to get past that thing. Obviously, this is a dumb example, but what I'm saying is, my wife, who is white, has nothing to do with anything that happened 100 years ago.
Hmm.
So talking to her and forcing her into these diversity and inclusion, teamwork, programs and things like that. Like it's like you're giving her a language. You're telling her something that she doesn't understand because she's not a racist person to begin with. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Does that make any kind of sense?
Yes, I think there's a. You're right. I think there is a danger there. Let's talk about race and talk about racism and talk about the systems that perpetuate inequalities based on race, of course, but not everything is race isn't something that figures in everything, or need not figure in everything. In the same way that there are always power relations, but sometimes talking about the power relations doesn't get at anything that matters. So if we're engaged in set academics aside for a second, suppose we're musicians and we want to play. We come together and it's the music that's the focus. And anything else that we might want to bring in is going to divert us from playing together as musicians or sitting together as members of an audience. I think the same is true with academics. We're studying, we're engaged in discussion. That some of us are of one race and some of us are of another race is irrelevant for many of the things we do, and to keep it in the forefront makes it a topic of discussion when it's not of interest or it's not relevant to a particular discussion. I think the same might be true about politics, right? People have said, well, everything's political, and in a sense, that's true. But if you're there's no way to make yourself more boring than to take the political angle on everything that comes up with your friends, your family, your fellow musicians, fellow academics, or whatever. Sure, talk about it when it's relevant, and make your passion about politics known. But there are other things to talk about. And I think this is true with regard to power, with regard to race, with regard to a lot of things that seem to be important to people. And again, you're right. If that's the axis on which things revolve, then we're going to be separating ourselves from each other. In the same way that if politics is the axis on which things revolve, we're going to be separating ourselves into left, right, or Democrat, Republican, or
Yeah.
or whatever. Even when those distinctions don't matter to the project at hand.
Well, now these companies, and I'm sure universities are the same way, they have diversity, equity, and inclusion officers.
Yes.
So a person is getting paid a lot of money to focus on. I mean, race is one of the main topics. I know there's other areas that they focus on, but that is what their sole mission is how to be more inclusive, whatever that term is, whatever
Yeah.
that definition really is. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, all these companies have these large roles getting paid a lot of money, and that's what their focus is on. So it's always going to be a little bit of race driven in whatever
Yeah.
discussion that they're a part of.
Well, no, of course. It's a bit like censorship, right? If you
Mhm.
hire someone to be a censor, they're going to find work for themselves. And she might say, okay, we need some sort of rules to prevent these really awful things to be said. But that's half an hour of work every 3 weeks, right? So if you have someone in the office, they're going to be looking for it. So if you have a equity, diversity, and inclusion officer or officers, if you have an office for this, it's going to find work for itself, and that work might be overseeing what's going on, getting in the way of warm and friendly interpersonal relations when something comes up, and yeah, it can really have a very bad effect on just people getting along with each other, people getting about their work.
Yeah, because what's the goal of that office? Is the goal to truly, I mean, restore inclusion and diversity? I don't know what the right phrasing is here, but it's like having a homeless czar in a big city. You know, like these large cities in Texas have
Mm-hmm.
positions that are aimed at dealing with the homeless.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't want to work themselves out of a job, right? They're getting paid a lot of money, right? So you can't fix it, right? So you're just going to keep doing stuff, and to keep the ball moving a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's right. That they are looking for something to do to fill their time, but many of them are committed, and they do think that there are problems that can be solved in the ways that they want to solve them. Now, I think that even if there are problems, there are better and worse ways of solving them. And sometimes a way of solving a problem just creates other problems and creates other problems in other areas. So you always have to be trying to balance your approach. If you create an office that has some purpose, and perhaps the purpose is a good one, perhaps the means that that office uses to attain it creates problems elsewhere and might do damage. But equity, diversity, and inclusion offices. At St. Mary's, we have a vice president of inclusion, equity, diversity. We have a non-academic staff member who looks after this. We have another non-academic staff member who's in charge of something like, I don't know what it's called, campus atmosphere or whatever.
Wow.
They have some. So we have this bureaucracy, and these people are being paid. Two things about that. One, it's a waste of money from the point of view of education, from the point of view of teaching and research. There are, you could hire more student tutors with this money. You could hire another professor. Smaller classes would make for a better experience. So the money is not being well spent in the first place. The second thing is that it creates some administrative bloat. Now, they're going to be reporting to deans and to academic vice presidents. That takes their time and their effort away from other things that they could be doing. More administrators means more meetings, more memos, more activity, and activity that's not centrally directly related to the academic missions of teaching and research and service. Administrative bloat is a problem wherever there are administrations, but it's certainly a problem at universities. And offices that don't really contribute to the mission of the university we ought not have these offices. If there's problems about, just say, retaining faculty or whatever, that falls to the deans and to the academic vice presidents. That's part of their job, and let them do it. And don't bring in so-called specialists. They'll look for more work. So anyway, I agree with you about that.
something I just thought about. A lot of these inclusion, patriots, I've noticed recently that they happen to be all white. Most of them, by and large, are white people. I don't see Hispanic people,
Mhm.
championing diversity and inclusion. I don't see a whole lot of African Americans getting out in the forefront and saying there's a problem in universities or corporate America.
Mhm.
I've noticed that most of the team leaders that are leading the programs and stuff like that, especially in corporate America, I don't know what you're
Mhm.
seeing in at the university level, but they're mostly all white people.
Well, what conclusion do you want to draw from that?
It's
What does that suggest?
I think it's I don't know. I don't know what.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just waving a flag. I'm doing this because
Yeah.
I'm a better person than the other person. I'm fixing what my generation or what my ancestor did in the past.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I do notice that it's mostly white people that are the champions of these networks and these groups.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't. I haven't looked. I don't know that it would matter to me.
Yeah.
Whatever. I think the endeavor is wrong-headed. Whatever the race or sexual orientation or whatever of the people who have these positions, it it, it's a waste of money. It creates administrative bloat. But it also, I think, has one of the pernicious effects is that it turns what are academic positions into something like, reserved spaces.
Mm.
If you have, say, a hockey team, you want the team to be the best team it can be. And to be a team, you might not want all the best players because you want people who can, pass the puck as well as take the puck. So you want a team that works together and different roles and the like. But if you start saying something like, well, it's important that our team reflect the demographics of our community, then you're saying that hockey doesn't matter to you as much as something else does. That even though this is, why we're here to play hockey, well, that's only part of why we're here, and maybe not even what's most important about what we're here. So I think it can. And what's that going to do to the hockey players? We're going to, I mean, the serious hockey players are going to demoralize them.
Mm.
They're going to say, I wanted to play hockey. And I think it's having that effect on professors at universities. We want our university. Um, the academic mission is not the very most important thing in all the world, right? Peace and prosperity and love and justice, much more important. At the same time, when we're in our role as professors, the academic mission is the most important thing for us. Just in the same way, when you're on the ice playing hockey, the hockey game is the most important thing for you, even though you know that, well, really, justice and peace and prosperity and all these things are much more important. Um, but when you're engaged in the thing, whatever the thing is, you want the thing to have integrity. You want it to be whatever it's supposed to be. And so for a university, you want the university to be a place where people who enjoy their intellectual and moral autonomy can come together in community to try to figure out how things are, who can look into how things are in the world and argue with each other about how they dispute with each other. You want people who read poetry and present their interpretations and talk about the adequacy of their interpretations back and forth. And that's what we're here to do, even if it isn't the very most important thing in all the world. It's the very most important thing in this institution. And while we're in this institution, that's what we want to do. But then if you say, well, there are reserved spaces and there are sinecures and some people are here out of the goodness of our hearts or whatever, you're saying that the institution doesn't have integrity, that the institution is it's a tool to be used for something else. other than whatever the intrinsic goals of the institution are. And I think that that's one of the main problems with equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives, is that they detract from the integrity of the academic mission at academic universities, at academic institutions.
You have a very unique take, and it's refreshing to hear, hear it. One thing that is hopeful though is that there's more and more people getting married and having kids with, having mixed families.
Mm-hmm.
So now, I mean, it's not like it was, in the 80s and 70s where, white people were with white people, black people were with black people. Now everyone's commingling. And, it'd be interesting to see what the world looks like in the next 20 to 30 years because everyone, we're all mixed.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't
Well,
know.
we always were,
Right.
humans. One thing about humans is that they like to breed. And all through history, people have been intermingling. Yeah, but I think you're right. The sort of individual racism that marked relations 50 or 60 years ago is, a thing of the past. That there are very few people who are don't want to associate with people because of the color of their skin or something like that. So one concern that you can have with EDI is some equity, diversity, and inclusion people think of themselves as involved in a means of overcoming racial separation or overcoming the marginalization of certain sexualities or whatever. But it's possible that they're helping people to remain in silos and working towards reinstituting or firming up borders and boundaries. If people are now understanding themselves as their race or their sexual orientation or whatever as central to who they are and essential to their community, then that can create a barrier toward the sorts of movement that you were talking about. On the other hand, there are some who indeed are separatists, right? Who do think that groups have a commonality, and that commonality can be threatened by the encroachment of others, and so we want to keep them separate. I find that dispiriting. But it is a movement within some enclaves within equity, diversity, and inclusion bureaucracies and initiatives, meaning to keep people apart, keep people as part of their groups. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of the term ethnic cleansing.
Yes.
Right. And it should fill you with horror and disgust.
Absolutely.
At the same time, there's sort of a mild ethnic cleansing that is within the heart of some EDI bureaucracies. There's the other expression, stay in your lane, right? And again, that's frightening. I want to try other lanes. Let's see.
Right.
And why not? And maybe I go to some other lane and I really like it, and the people there like me. Well, why not? Even if there are some differences on the surface. So I think EDI does have that underside, and I think even some of the people in EDI recognize that's a dangerous underside. But unfortunately, I think there's some who don't think it's dangerous at all, who are thrilled at maintaining the purity of one group or another.
Do you think that life in general across the country and in Canada and United States, it's just things are too good and we need to solve a problem? We have to create a problem. We need to have a focus and come together on a certain topic or a certain issue at hand. Do you think that maybe this is what a little bit of this is?
Well, I don't actually have an opinion. Again, that's something that I'd like to research more. I know that's Douglas Murray's view, where he says this is what St. George in retirement. There are no dragons left, right, for St. George to kill. So he has to look for smaller and smaller game. He has to pretend that such and such is a dragon when it really isn't, in order to give his life meaning. That might very well be true. I really don't know. I don't want to offer an opinion on that question.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I appreciate your time, man. Your perspective is very important, and it intrigued me. Are you on social media so people can follow you or anything like that?
Well, I'm on Facebook, but
Facebook?
That's
okay.
all.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyone who wants to send me a message, engage in discussion with, my university email address is posted on the website of the university. They can do so.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, I'll. Is it okay if I link that in the show notes?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay. All right. Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, I'll do that, Mark. And again, I appreciate your time. I enjoyed this conversation.
Well, thanks, Jonathan. I enjoyed it as well.
Okay. You take it easy. Have a good one.
Thanks. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.